December 15, 2000, 2:07 a.m. The temperature in Wichita, Kansas has plunged to 17.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow blankets the ground, and in this darkness, a young woman runs barefoot through the frozen night. She's bleeding from a gunshot wound to her head. Behind her lie the bodies of 4 of her closest friends. This isn't just another crime story. This is the account of one of the most horrific cases in Kansas history. A night that would forever change a community, expose the depths of human cruelty, and reveal extraordinary courage in the face of unimaginable terror. In the hours before, 5 young professionals had gathered in a home on Birchwood Drive. They were teachers, dreamers, people who dedicated their lives to helping others. None of them could have known that their ordinary evening would spiral into a nightmare that would shake Wichita to its core. One would survive to tell their story. One would walk through the freezing darkness, her footprints staining the snow red, desperate to reach help before it was too late, before the killers could finish what they started. This is the story of the Wichita Massacre. A warning to our viewers. What you're about to hear is disturbing. It involves real people, real loss, and real grief. We tell this story not to sensationalize, but to remember, to honor those whose lives were taken, and to ensure their stories are never forgotten. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. To understand the path that led to the horrors in Wichita, we must first return to Dodge City, Kansas, where Reginald and Jonathan Carr's story began. Born to a turbulent household on November 14, 1977 and March 30, 1980, respectively, their brothers' early years were shaped by an environment of persistent violence and instability. Their childhood home was more battlefield than sanctuary. Their parents' relationship was marked by extreme violence, physical confrontations that played out in front of the children with shocking regularity. But the violence wasn't confined to their parents. Their older sister endured sexual abuse at the hands of their father, and later, their mother's successive boyfriends continued this pattern of abuse. When their parents finally divorced, their father didn't just leave, he completely abandoned his old life, severing all ties with his children. This abandonment left them in the care of their mother, Janice Harding, whose choice in partners would continue the cycle of violence. Her second marriage proved particularly volatile, reaching a horrifying climax when her new husband held a gun to her head while the children watched. The brothers' time with their maternal grandmother, intended as a refuge from their troubled home life, offered little respite. She too was prone to sudden, explosive outbursts of rage. Physical punishment was a constant in their lives, with their mother reportedly using electrical cords to discipline them, a practice that left both physical and psychological scars. The impact on each brother manifested in distinctly different ways. Reginald, the elder, developed an aggressive protective streak toward his younger brother. By age 6, an age when most children are just starting school, he was already familiar with drugs and exposed to sexual knowledge far beyond his years. His school record became marked by frequent fights and poor academic performance. Jonathan's trauma emerged through self-destruction. His teenage years were marked by deep depression, culminating in a suicide attempt at 16 when he drank antifreeze. This cry for help went largely unaddressed, becoming another layer in his troubled development. As they entered adulthood, both brothers' lives became a revolving door of criminal activity. Reginald's adult years were punctuated by failed marriages and escalating crimes. In 1995, at just 18, he received his first significant sentence, 13 months, for theft. This was quickly followed by additional sentences for aggravated assault and subverting the legal process. By 1996, he was serving 28 months on drug charges. Despite multiple interactions with the justice system, neither brother received the intervention or mental health support that might have altered their trajectory. Jonathan's criminal record, though sealed, showed a similar pattern of escalating offenses. Their early exposure to violence seemed to have normalized it in their minds. In a cruel twist of fate, a clerical error would set the stage for tragedy. On December 5, 2000, Reginald Carr was mistakenly released from custody 6 months early. Just 3 days later, the brothers would begin their reign of terror in Wichita. What followed would shock the conscience of the entire state and reveal the devastating consequences of generational trauma transformed into calculated violence. But understanding the roots of violence never excuses it, and nothing in their troubled past could justify or explain the deliberate cruelty they would soon inflict on innocent people whose only mistake was crossing paths with two men shaped by years of violence and trauma. In the year 2000, Wichita, Kansas stood as a symbol of Midwestern tranquility. East Birchwood Drive, with its carefully maintained homes and close-knit community, represented everything people loved about this city of 344,000. In December, holiday decorations brightened the winter nights, and families prepared for Christmas, unaware that their sense of security was about to be shattered. The neighborhood around Crystal Lake had always been considered one of Wichita's safer areas. Here, residents left their doors unlocked, children played freely in their yards, and neighbors knew each other by name. The Stryker Soccer Complex, just on the outskirts of town, was where families gathered on weekends to watch their children play. These familiar places would soon become forever linked to a series of crimes that would haunt the community for decades to come. What began on December 8th seemed, at first, like an isolated incident, but over the next 7 days, a wave of escalating violence would sweep through these peaceful streets. Each day brought new reports, new fears, as the community slowly realized that something sinister was unfolding in their midst. 12727 East Birchwood Drive, an address that would become tragically familiar to every Wichita resident, sat in a quiet triplex development. Its residents were young professionals, teachers, financial analysts, people building their futures. They represented the best of what Wichita had to offer. Dedicated community members whose lives intersected with countless others through their work and volunteerism. But in that week of December, as Christmas lights twinkled and temperatures dropped, these peaceful neighborhoods would become the backdrop for a series of events that would forever change how Wichita viewed itself. The community's sense of security, built over generations, would be tested in ways no one could have imagined. What happened here wasn't just a crime story. It was a watershed moment that would divide Wichita's history into before and after. And it began with a series of seemingly unconnected incidents that would soon reveal themselves as part of something far more terrifying. December 8, 2000, a cold Thursday evening at a come-and-go convenience store in East Wichita. 23-year-old Andrew Schreiber, an assistant baseball coach, was going about his routine when his ordinary night turned into a nightmare. Two men forced their way into his car at gunpoint, making him drive to various ATMs to withdraw money. "I was just hoping if I did what they said, they'd let me live," Schreiber would later testify. After taking what they could, they drove him to a field, pistol-whipped him, and shot out his car's tires, leaving him stranded in the darkness. The community had little time to process this troubling incident before violence struck again. 3 days later, December 11th. 55-year-old Ann Walenta, a beloved cellist with the Wichita Symphony Orchestra, pulled into her driveway. A man approached her SUV, apparently asking for help. Suspicious of a car she'd noticed following her, she barely cracked her window. In that moment of caution, a gun was thrust through the narrow opening. As she attempted to escape, shots rang out. Walenta, critically wounded, managed to sound her car horn, a desperate call for help that brought neighbors running. The police now had two seemingly unrelated violent crimes. Both victims had been approached at random. Both attacks showed a level of preparation that troubled investigators. But the worst was yet to come. December 14th began like any other winter evening. At 12727 Birchwood Drive, 5 friends were gathering, young professionals whose lives were dedicated to serving their community. Each of them had their own dreams, their own stories. Jason Beeford was 26, a beloved science teacher and coach at Augusta High School. That night, hidden in a popcorn can in his kitchen, was an engagement ring he was planning to propose to his girlfriend before Christmas. Bradley Haken, 27, was making his mark in the financial world as a financial analyst, known for his sharp mind and kind heart. Aaron Sander, at 29, had already succeeded as a financial analyst but felt a higher calling. He was studying to become a priest, dedicating his life to serving others. Heather Muller, 25, taught preschool at St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic School. Her students adored her, and she touched countless young lives with her passion for teaching. The fifth person present that night was H.G., also 25, another dedicated teacher. Out of respect for her privacy as the survivor of what would unfold, we continued to protect her identity. These 5 friends represented the best of Wichita. Young professionals who chose careers helping others, building their community, shaping future generations. As they gathered that evening, the temperature outside dropping to 17.6 degrees, none of them could have known that their lives were about to intersect with a violence that had been escalating across their city for the past week. What began as a normal evening would become the culmination of a week of escalating terror, and for 4 of these 5 friends, it would be their last night alive. At approximately 11 p.m. on December 14th, the peace inside 12727 Birchwood Drive was shattered when the porch light unexpectedly came on. Jason Beffert, still awake, noticed this unusual occurrence. Moments later, 2 armed intruders forced their way into the home. The 5 friends, who had been in different areas of the house, were gathered into one room. H.G. was grading papers in her boyfriend's room. Aaron Sander had been sleeping on the living room couch. Brad Haka was in his basement bedroom. Heather Muller was in another ground-floor bedroom. They were now all together, facing an unimaginable nightmare. During their search of the home, the intruders discovered something that would make this night even more poignant: a coffee can containing an engagement ring. Jason Beffert had been planning to propose to H.G. that coming Friday, December 22nd. This is how she would learn of his intentions, in circumstances no one could have imagined. For the next 3 hours, the intruders methodically forced their victims to withdraw money from ATM machines. They would take them one at a time in Jason's truck, while maintaining control over the others left behind. Each trip through the dark, empty streets of Wichita marked another moment of terror for these young professionals. The ordeal inside the house would last until 2:07 a.m., when the perpetrators finally forced all 5 victims to leave their home. None of them could have known they were beginning their final journey together. The intruders had found roughly $800 in total during their repeated ATM visits, a tragically small sum for the price that would be paid that night. At 2:07 a.m., with the temperature at 17.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the victims were forced from their home into the bitter winter night. The Carr brothers allowed the women minimal clothing, just a sweater or sweatshirt, but no shoes. The men were given no protection from the brutal cold. The perpetrators attempted to force all 5 victims into the trunk of Aaron Sanders' Honda Accord, but quickly realized this was impossible. They then split their captives between vehicles. The men in the trunk of the Honda, while H.G. was forced into Jason's truck with Reginald Carr, and Heather Muller was placed in the Honda with Jonathan Carr. Through the snow-covered streets of Wichita, this grim procession made its way to the Stryker Soccer Complex, a familiar recreational space that would soon become the site of unthinkable violence. Upon arrival, H.G. was ordered to join Heather Muller in the Honda. Moments later, she watched as the men were lined up in the snow. H.G. would later testify that she turned to Heather and whispered, "They're going to shoot us." The victims were ordered to kneel in the snow. What happened next demonstrated both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human resilience. When the shooting began, H.G. was struck in the back of the head, but fate, through what some might call divine intervention, had other plans for H.G. The bullet that struck her was deflected by her plastic hair barrette, a simple accessory that would prove to be the difference between life and death. As she lay in the snow, pretending to be dead, she heard the vehicles drive away, their wheels running over the bodies of her friends as they departed. What followed was an extraordinary testament to human resilience. Despite her injuries, despite being inadequately clothed in the freezing temperature, despite having just witnessed the murders of her closest friends, she rose from the snow. She began a journey through the darkness, a mile-long walk that would save her life and ultimately bring justice. She followed the distant glow of Christmas lights, stumbling through construction sites, around a pond, and through brutal winter conditions. Her footprints in the snow marked a trail of survival, each step a testament to human will to live, each moment a tribute to the friends she had just lost. When she finally reached help, her first thoughts weren't of herself. Even believing she might die from her wounds, she insisted on telling her story first, worried about who would care for her students. Asking someone to tell her mother she loved her, and ensuring that law enforcement would know exactly what had happened to her friends. This extraordinary act of survival would prove crucial in bringing the perpetrators to justice. But for now, as emergency responders rushed to the scene, 4 families were about to receive news that would shatter their worlds forever. As dawn broke over Wichita on December 15th, law enforcement was already racing against time. HG's detailed testimony, given even as medical personnel tended to her wounds, provided investigators with crucial information that would prove invaluable in the hours ahead. The young couple who had taken HG in couldn't believe what they were hearing. Despite her traumatic head wound and the horror she had just endured, she remained remarkably clear and focused, providing precise descriptions of the attackers and a detailed timeline of events. Her testimony would become the foundation of what would prove to be one of the swiftest manhunts in Wichita's history. By sunrise, local television stations were broadcasting the license plate number of Jason Befort's stolen truck. This would prove to be a crucial turning point. At approximately 7:30 a.m., barely 5 hours after the crimes, a breakthrough came. A witness reported seeing someone carrying a large television set into an apartment building, and nearby stood the truck police were searching for. The investigation moved with remarkable speed. Police quickly sealed off the area around the apartment complex. When officers knocked on the door of one unit, they encountered a woman named Stephanie Donnelly. Inside, they found Reginald Carr attempting to escape through a window. The first arrest had been made. But the investigation wasn't over. Information obtained at the scene led police to another location, where they found a Plymouth Fury belonging to Jonathan Carr. By noon, less than 10 hours after the crimes, officers located him at a house in another part of town. Despite his attempt to flee, Jonathan Carr was quickly apprehended after a short chase. The evidence began mounting quickly. Andrew Schreiber, the victim of the December 8th robbery, positively identified Reginald Carr as one of his attackers. In a tragic turn, Ann Walwenta, still fighting for her life in the hospital, was able to identify both brothers in a lineup before succumbing to her wounds weeks later. Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence was found along Route 96, near the soccer field where the shootings took place. A highway worker discovered a black .380 caliber Lorchin semi-automatic handgun. The Kansas State Crime Lab would confirm this was the weapon used in both the Walwenta shooting and the quadruple homicide. The community's response was immediate and profound. As news of the arrest spread, citizens of Wichita grappled with the reality of what had happened in their city. Sales of security systems soared. Gun purchases increased. Locks were changed. The sense of safety that had once defined this Midwestern community had been fundamentally shaken. But amid the fear and grief, there was also unity. Residents came together to support the victims' families. Vigils were held. Fundraisers were organized. The community refused to let this tragedy define them, even as they knew nothing would ever be quite the same. In less than 12 hours, law enforcement had apprehended both suspects and gathered substantial evidence. But for the families of Jason Beffert, Bradley Haker, Aaron Sander, and Heather Muller, the journey for justice was just beginning. A long legal process lay ahead, one that would span decades and test the very foundations of Kansas's justice system. The trial that followed would prove to be one of the most dramatic in Kansas history. The evidence against the Carr brothers was overwhelming. DNA evidence, ballistics, eyewitness testimony, and HG's powerful courtroom appearance left little room for doubt. The gravity of the testimony was such that during one session, when a trauma surgeon detailed the shooting of Ann Walenta, a juror fainted and had to be taken to the hospital. In October 2002, after weeks of heart-wrenching testimony, the verdict came down. The Carr brothers were found guilty of nearly all counts against them: capital murder, aggravated kidnapping, robbery, and rape. The judge sentenced both to death. But this would only mark the beginning of a lengthy legal journey. The appeals process would span decades, testing the very framework of Kansas's death penalty law. In 2004, the state Supreme Court overturned the death penalty statute entirely, only to have it reinstated by the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2014, another appeal led to the death sentences being temporarily overturned. But in 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court again reinstated them. Through it all, the families of the victims showed remarkable dignity and patience. But beyond the courtroom, something profound was happening in Wichita. The community refused to let this tragedy be the final word. At St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic School, where Heather Muller had touched so many young lives as a preschool teacher, the Heather Muller Love of Faith Award was established. Each year it honors an 8th grade student who embodies the spirit of faith and service that defined Heather's life. At Wichita State University, the Ann Walenta Music Scholarship keeps alive the memory of a talented musician who brought beauty to the world through her cello performances. Her legacy lives on through young musicians who share her passion for music. The impact on Wichita was transformative. New security measures were implemented citywide. Police procedures were updated. Community watch programs expanded. But perhaps most significantly, the bonds between neighbors grew stronger. People looked out for each other in ways they hadn't before. The tragedy brought about another unexpected change. Local law enforcement enhanced their victim support services, ensuring that survivors of violent crimes would have better access to resources and support. HG's extraordinary courage had shown how crucial immediate support could be for survivors. Today, memorial gardens and quiet spaces of reflection stand as testimonies to those whose lives were taken. These places serve not just as memorials, but as reminders of the preciousness of life and the importance of community. The scholarship funds and awards established in the victims' names ensure that their spirit of service and dedication to others lives on through new generations. While nothing can erase the events of that December night, the legacy of Jason Beaufort, Bradley Hake, Aaron Sander, Heather Muller, and Ann Walenta lives on through the countless lives they touched and through the positive changes their tragic deaths inspired in their community. Their stories remind us that even in our darkest moments, light can emerge through justice, through remembrance, and through the unbreakable bonds of community. The Wichita Massacre forever changed a community, but it also revealed the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Through the courage of one survivor, through the dedication of law enforcement, and through the unwavering strength of a community, justice was served. But the true measure of this case's impact lies not in its legal resolution, but in how it transformed a city and its people. Today, the legacy of those lost continues to live on in tangible ways. Every student who receives the Heather Muller Love of Faith Award carries forward her spirit of service. Each young musician supported by the Ann Walenta Scholarship continues her passion for bringing beauty into the world. The teaching careers of Jason Beaufort and Aaron Sander inspire new generations of educators. Bradley Hake's dedication to excellence lives on through those who knew him. But perhaps the most powerful legacy is the one left by HG, whose extraordinary courage in the face of unimaginable horror reminds us of the strength of the human will to survive. Her testimony not only brought justice, but also sparked crucial changes in how communities respond to violent crime and support survivors. The events of December 2000 stand as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of community. But they also show us that even in our darkest moments, hope endures. That through remembrance, through positive action, and through unwavering commitment to justice, we honor those we've lost. To Jason Beaufort, Bradley Hake, Aaron Sander, Heather Muller, and Ann Walenta, your lives mattered. Your deaths changed us. and your legacies continue to inspire positive change in countless ways. May we never forget, and may we continue to work toward a future where such tragedies become increasingly rare, where communities grow stronger through adversity, and where the memory of those lost serves as a catalyst for positive change. For information about preventing violence in your community or supporting victims of violent crime, please visit the resources listed in the description below. What would you have done if you heard the porch light turn on that night? What moment from this case hit you the hardest? Share your thoughts and reflections below. Remember to be respectful in the comments. We're discussing real victims and real tragedy. If you enjoyed this content, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.